The railroads were probably the biggest benefactors during the Second Industrial Revolution. So what we see here is a map of the first transcontinental railroad. So using our margin in red, you have the Union Pacific, which started in Omaha, Nebraska, and started moving west. And in green, again using our margin, we have the Central Pacific, which started in Sacramento and started moving east. Eventually, both railroad lines met at Promontory Point, Utah. And of course, the reason they were able to construct the railroads for several reasons. First of all, favorable land grants. A grant, it's a gift. So the federal government gave these two major companies land for free. Of course, that land was Native American land that the government kicked out, killed, put them in reservations. And to be able to put the railroad lines, the government also gave these railroads favorable loans, easy loans, right? And this is the way it worked. For every 1 mile of line that the railroads were able to put down, the federal government divided the land between the federal government and the railroads, 10 square miles on each side of the road. So 10 square miles on that side, 10 square miles on that side. And the railroad companies were supposed to take their share of the land and sell it to settlers for favorable loans. What happened was that these railroads, they actually started to sell the land that belonged to them to small businesses to make a lot of profit. And of course, they would charge them large amounts of interest rates on the loans that they got. So we have the first transcontinental railroad here that was established in 1869 between the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, as I already mentioned. Oops, let me go back. Both lines received land grants from the government. It linked the East and the West physically, but it also linked the East and the West economically, the entire country. It linked the East and the West politically and socially, because if you have a family member that lives in California, now you could go and visit them. The Central Pacific hired Chinese immigrants and paid them about $35 a month. The Union Pacific hired Irish and ex Civil War soldiers and paid them between $40 and $60 a month plus free meals. So yet again, we see the discrimination of immigrants, in particular the Chinese. The Chinese are probably the most discriminated immigrant group in the United States uh, history ever. Working conditions were horrible. Diseases were horrible. It killed and it harmed thousands of people. And again, there was no workers' compensation, no sick leave, no vacation for the workers. So that was part of the reason why workers continued to go frustrated. And of course, these lines, what they did was they would ship cattle, right? The cattle that we talked about earlier. They would ship oil to make a lot of money. And of course, they would also ship passengers. And because of the railroads, businesses, steel businesses, and oil businesses are making money because you need steel to be able to make the engine and be able to lay the railroad lines as well. So railroads, they became a large business making a lot of money, the most successful business in the United States during the Second Industrial Revolution. And then in this map, what we see, we actually see other transcontinental railroads. So up in the north, we see the Great Northern Railroad here. It connects the northern part. The initial one, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, the Atlantic Pacific and the Topeka, and then of course the one that I'm wearing, the Southern Pacific that connects Los Angeles all the way down to New Orleans. So these land grants that the government gave to the railroads. And again, this grid kind of helps us understand how the land was divided. So this is 10 square miles. That little pink one represents the land that was given to the railroads, and they were supposed to sell that land to settlers at favorable price. The green little square represents the land that the government kept, and again, the government kept for numerous reasons. But that's how the land was divided, and again, that land was Native American land. The railroads also, what they did was they introduced time zones so that the railroads in the cities knew where they were going to be or when they were going to arrive at their destination. So time zones was another innovation of the railroads as well. And then we also see another chart here in terms of how many rail lines were being constructed in between 1860 and 1880. So miles of rail in 1870, 1871, when the second industrial revolution started, that's about 7,000. 1880, about another 7,000. And then 1890, we have about another 10,000. So a lot of work to be done. A lot of people doing this job, and of course they're making money, and at the same time they're able to buy new goods as well. That's more or less what happens in this particular part of the slide. We'll continue with the other ones in a minute.